Is there a strategy that'll help you grow your company faster? CEO Sales Strategies is an investigative business podcast for entrepreneurial people who never stop asking questions. Highly acclaimed sales revenue growth expert Doug C. Brown interviews CEOs, business owners, and professionals who serve them to uncover and share actionable tips and methods behind their bulletproof sales strategies. Topics covered on the show include their failures, struggles, secrets, and processes that help them succeed in selling millions to billions of dollars of their products and services, all with the sole aim of helping you grow your business. If you are eager to know the most effective sales secrets from the A players of the game, then the CEO Sales Strategies podcast is certainly the place to be.
Hey, this is Doug C. Brown with the CEO Sales Strategies podcast. Today we have a really great subject. We're going to talk about podcasting and why, if you're a B2B or B2C company, it is a must. And I've got an excellent guest. Her name is Susan Finch. Susan owns a company called Funnel Media Group. And we're going to talk a lot about the do's and don'ts of how to get this off the ground. And once you're off the ground, what to do and what not to. In order to make your podcast exceptional in production for you and bringing you qualified people to talk to. So without further ado, let's go talk to Susan. Hey, Susan, welcome to the CEO Sales Strategies podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, Doug, I love being invited on your podcast. You were wonderful on mine, and I was so thrilled when you asked me. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. This is a really important subject matter that I think all people who are in sales, selling to CEOs, selling to companies, or just the company itself should really be interested in. And it's like, why should you today in 2022, almost 2023, why should we need a podcast? Like, what's the point now of having a podcast and what can it do for us? So let's start with the beginning, if you will. Why should any company, any salesperson, any solo entrepreneur, any major company, minor company, in between, why should they have a podcast today?
We need to reach people that are busy, people on the move. Not everybody has the time to sit and watch a video or read the transcripts floating across and crawling across the screen. They're doing 5 things at once, even though we're working from home, even though we're doing other things. All of the decision makers are on the move. And this allows them a way to hear our messages when they're actually, unfortunately, driving. They're a little more focused, or at the gym, or in between meetings. It's something they can easily pick up while they're doing maybe something else. We aren't always 100% focused on them, but boy, do we get to reach new audiences.
You know, we used to call this windshield time, right?
Yep.
Back in the old days when, you only could drive from point A to point B, and you were doing live sales, and because that's all there was,
Right.
Yes, folks, I'm that old. There was no internet back then. So but the reality is that now more than ever, people, they still have downtime, but they're not filling it. It used to be, the transition that I see or have seen over the time is it went from, okay, we did windshield time. Then we had lots of social media and stuff that, we could interact with online. But now I see a massive shift going over to podcasts because people, well, quite frankly, some of them are very just fed up with social media in general, right? No disrespect for Facebook, who's now Meta, but it looks like, a lot of people I know, especially in the younger age, they're kind of abandoning this. And the older age groups, i.e. mine, we use Facebook, we don't really, so,
Right.
And then LinkedIn's really not that entertainment side of the business life on social media. And, TikTok works, but, you don't find many people in the traditionalist or the baby boomer generation on TikTok as well. So podcast to me has become the new iPod, right?
Well, it is, but the thing that you hit on was social media We know, as working with so many tools, so many scheduling tools, pre-writing, AI, all those tools that can write all of that for us. Podcasting, like video, you see the real people, you hear the real people. These are their conversations actually happening, not somebody crafting it, editing it, scheduling it. And so there is more credibility there too. There is a way to get to know those people, their brand, their messaging comfortably, and build that trust, rather than I'm reading something that the team put together on my behalf and is speaking for me.
Right.
Huge difference.
That's a huge difference. I agree with you, because I wrote down the word webinar, right? Because in the old days we used to do live webinars.
Right.
So people would get to know who you were through a live webinar. They could see your personality, understand, hear your voice, all that stuff. And then when we did them in a smaller group, we would open it up so people would be able to interact throughout. Right. It's a huge conversion mechanism for being able to build trust and respect. And I think podcasting has done the same. As you said, it gives you more credibility, right? And people allows somebody to actually know the person as a person, yes, as much. And these aren't scripted. I mean, I imagine some podcasts are scripted. I mean, certainly this one's never going to be scripted. I know yours wasn't scripted, because I was pulling you all over the place. We know that. And so but you got these people who are busy on the move. They're looking to consumption. I also think it's free to consume this consumption today, right? So before, it would be paying for access to some type of information, like, whether it was just we were buying a CD, right? Or some type of training program on cassette tape. Yep, I'm that old. I can remember back. I know you're not, Susan, and you never remembered cassettes or 8-tracks.
No. I remember the cases you would give to clients with all the tapes in them.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
So for those of you who aren't old enough to understand what we're saying, there used to be a carrying case that you would actually put the CDs in, or you would put a carrying case in with cassette tapes. And so you might have like 100 cassette tapes in this big box, and you would take this big box and then you would bring it over to wherever you were going, right? And then in the middle of it, always the tape would break, one of those things. Especially when it was on your favorite song and you played it 300 times, and then it would just break. But when we're talking about training, like, even, I remember when I was listening to, like, Tony Robbins or Vincent Norman Peale, or, some business to business training specific sales process, I had to pay for all that stuff. And now, with a few mouse clicks and a couple search terms, you can actually find pretty quickly what you want for content, and it doesn't cost anything. So I think that also provides a variety of, not a variety, but an expectation of, hey, I want to consume this more. Thoughts?
Well, it also, because it's so accessible, we can also search the credibility of the people we're about to invest our time. That's still our money. And we can look them up and say, are they any good? Who is actually talking about that person? Just because I can find it and they know how to do SEO doesn't mean this is worth my time to listen to. The beauty of that, you can go check. Most people would go and check, well, before I listen to these 5 hours of tapes or recordings or downloads or webinars or whatever it is, I'm going to go check them out on Apple and see, do they have ratings? Do they have 55 shows? Who are their guests? This is a credible person. I'm going to check them out on LinkedIn. Okay, now I'm going to do it. Now I'm interested. I'm intrigued by them, their company, and now maybe their message. And I might talk to other people about it.
That's a really cool point. So those of you who are wondering, hey, should I have a podcast? The answer is yes, in my humble opinion at this point. And the reason behind that is, I think, just what you said. It provides not only credibility, but it provides research credibility, which means, look, today, before people are buying things, especially complex services, they are checking out not only the person that they're actually going to be buying from, but they're checking out the company, they're checking out what they're doing. And I've been speaking with several companies that are doing, 40 million to $250 million and up.
Right.
And they're all saying the same thing. It's like, oh, yeah. We actually have meetings where we look at this and we sit down and it's a decision. And a podcast is a really good way of really getting not only just the message out there, but building that credibility, as you were saying, Susan. It also is a really great thing because you can, if you utilize it right, it's good for search.
We know that. I mean, that's, me, that's my sweet spot, is how do you maximize the old content, the old shows? Because if you've bothered to do this, have it be evergreen content, something that will still provide value, that will still come up. But I'm going to push you back a little bit. When you said everybody should have a podcast, the one criteria that they shouldn't is if they can't commit to the time. Because most podcasts fail after 6 episodes. People burn out that fast.
And let's talk about why, because I'll still stand by what I said. Everybody should have a podcast.
Right.
And not to get argumentative, but but the reality is that it's kind of like people say, should I have a social media profile any longer?
True.
Right. And it's like, duh. Yeah. I mean,
Right.
Because it doesn't mean you have to be actively pushing that social media. Like people will say like, oh, you got to be, putting yourself out there every single day of the week. Right. No, you just have to have a really presentable social media. Right. And you really have to have just a presentable podcast. But let's talk about why people end on six episodes and on average, and
Right.
What they can do to prevent that. Because you're a master at this. So this is one of the reasons I was so happy to get you onto this podcast, because I'm like, finally, somebody who understands, not only production and all of that, but also understands how to reach a B2B audience as well as a B2C audience. So, or a business to entrepreneurial audience in addition to that. So take it away, if you will. What do they do to prevent themselves from just crashing and burning?
They need to answer 5 questions. What is the point of the podcast? And anybody who is involved in the show needs to have the same answer. And it's okay if it's to stoke the ego of the CEO. As long as everybody's honest about it, to know, because everything you do for your podcast has to check back to that. Then you need to have an idea who's going to host it then. Is it the CEO? Is it a few people sharing the duties? And are they any good at speaking? And can they commit to that time? Because if you say, oh yeah, Joe CEO is going to be the host, but he never has time. He's always annoyed when we try and book it. We get these guests that want to be on. You got to have a set team. This is why they usually fail. It's because nobody is committed to the time, because they haven't identified the tasks they must do. And it's okay if you all say, I only want to get the guest and talk. Perfect. Hire somebody to do the rest of it. That's fine. And if you don't even want to follow up and talk about it later, have somebody else do that, whether it's your marketing team or your podcast production services company like us, but have somebody willing to keep talking about your great content, that believes in your show, that understands your company. Because if all you're left to do is the fun part, and you can be down with that and keep going, you'll keep going.
Yeah.
But if you're stuck doing things that you thought, Bill was going to do and Jane was going to do, and they're not doing it, it's like, oh, somebody has to do it, because those two found something better to do because they didn't like it and they got bored. That's why. Yes, every company should have a podcast, because if you don't have enough of a message to fill a podcast, you don't have enough of a product or a service to be a success.
Makes a lot of sense. So we had point of the podcast, idea of the host of who's hosting it and doing what. Did you put the other 3 in there?
And it's identifying the team who's working on it.
Yeah.
And how long do you want these episodes to be? It depends on where your listeners are. You need to know where your people are that you want to find. And sometimes you're going to be finding the betweeners, the ones between meetings only, the ones on the treadmill. Or are they the ones that are going to binge listen to everything that you say? Because here's a weekend, I'm sick at home, I'm going to listen to 15 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And I have shows that are all different types, and they're just like that. And they can't wait till the next episode drops. Or they'll play catch up once a month and binge. So you need to identify that so you know how long to make it. So those are the first things that you need to know before you can even go any further.
So I will vouch, especially for point number one. If you don't understand the point of your podcast, it's like anything. If we don't know where we're going, then you'll just create something to create, right? And that's not a bad thing, but eventually you'll probably change your focus on the podcast. Like the CEO Sales Strategy podcast, when I was first doing this, it was more of like a challenge for me from other people. They're like, look, Doug, you have all this, great information and you're holding it from the world. So I'm like, all right, I'll just invite real people on and we'll have real conversations about business, about selling to, how to build your company, the failures, the good stuff that's happened, how to sell to CEOs, et cetera. And, it worked. It really did. But that really wasn't the focus that I wanted on the CEO sales strategies. Now we're shifting, like, how do you get into the top 1% of earners in selling, and how do companies access these top players, right? And how do we sell to CEOs utilizing A players? So it's okay, I think, if it shifts over time, but go back. So let's step back for a second, and everybody needs a podcast, right? The thing I would tell people is just do something, right? And the second thing I would say is, an idea of, who's going to host it, who's going to do the process. That is so critical, because no disrespect to some, you and I have been on a lot of podcasts over our time, and there are really great interviewers, and there are really people you're going, oh my gosh, just get me off this podcast, right? And so if you don't understand, you do need your own personality, but it has to flow. There's a lot of things that Susan can teach you on and around this for sure. But I would also say the production side of the podcast, don't produce it yourself. Like that would, especially if you're business to business, don't do it. I cannot tell you how many people that I've talked to, and they're like, yeah, I'm gonna do my own. And I'm like, you're spending 3 hours putting together production. Go sell something, pay somebody for the production, right? Because production's not that costly to do compared to what we could do is if we got out there and actually started selling. I mean, one sale could pay for 5 months worth of production,
Exactly.
So it's one of those things that I would highly recommend. Anybody who's listening to this going, okay, yeah, I get the point. I need a podcast, contact Susan, her company, by the way, company name is, Susan?
Funnel Media Group.
Funnel Media Group. And it's at funnelmediagroupllc.com. Reach out and have a conversation, because you'll learn a lot, if nothing else. I would say that too. If somebody's going to start a podcast, learn about podcasting, learn about what it means to be somebody. Anybody can learn how to be a interviewer. That's not an issue whatsoever. It's just, keep your own personality, keep it a little upbeat. And, I fortunately had a lot of experience at doing this. So for me, it was kind of walk in and do, I was a DJ, a professional DJ. I was, an interviewer and things like that. And identifying the team, I think that really goes back to the critical mission, right? Because now let me ask you a question, Susan. And by the way, we're talking with Susan Finch from Funnel Media Group, and they're at funnelmediagroupllc.com. My question is I'm starting up a podcast. Do I need video? Can I just do it on what's the right way of doing this to, well, maximize my exposure? Because that's what podcasting is all about, is to get you out in the public square, maximize that exposure. So should I have video? Because I have people say, oh, I'm just doing audio only. And I'm like, well, why not do video? You could stick them on YouTube. You could do this, you could do that, right? So I'd like to hear from the expert.
I am a firm believer in maximizing your efforts and time. We all have webcams now. Do it on video. And if you haven't spent the money to get a decent webcam so your HD face looks good, do that, because those close-ups can be a little scary.
Yeah.
You want to look good, you want to sound good. If you have a camera and a mic, that's a lot of the battle on the equipment. And the reason why you want the video is it's the engagement when you're talking to somebody. If I am audio only, and anybody that says differently is a liar, if you're just audio and holding the phone, you're walking around doing stuff.
Yep.
You are fidgeting, you're looking through things. We can hear it in your voice. We can hear the lack of focus. This way, we are engaged. We are playing off each other's facial expressions, what's going on in the room, whether we have green screen or not. And what I have found is the people that say, oh, I don't like doing video, I'm really uncomfortable. I said, well, let's just do it for the conversation. But I'm going to suggest that you wear your branded colors, just in case we can do a little short clip that you like and use it in places. And by the time we're within 5 minutes of the conversation, they are relaxed because we are talking together. The whole tone of the show relaxes and flows better. And then we have a nice little clip we can use on all social venues to hype up the show, to hype them up, to talk about how great they were on the show, because that's what we as hosts, our job is. If we're not monologuing, it is to make our guests shine like a star.
Yeah, and the shinier they become, what I have found is the shinier they become, the more people reach out to me.
Yes.
And that was kind of I started the podcast just because it was like double dare you to start one, Doug. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll take your dare. And but what I didn't realize is, I got just about a 4-to-1 return on my investment in the podcast in the first year, which I know not everybody does that, but
right.
What I learned was you make them a star and people respond to the fact that you're really making that other person shine. And so the expertise of what we do comes out through helping other people shine. And here's the thing, I never realized that podcasting was a really great prospecting tool. Right. Because I viewed it as kind of like social media back, in the days, right? I put out posts and I put consistent posts out and I've done this and I've done that. I never really got a lot of business out of doing that. I did get business intangible, I think would be the right word, right? Where people would say, hey, I watched your stuff, or I saw this post and I love this, or I love that. And then it came back around in business in some capacity. But with podcasting, what I'm finding is people, it's almost like, how people like on Instagram or whatever, they have fan bases. Mm-hmm. Podcasting has fan bases. It's kind of like, it's almost like you're a radio DJ when it works out. And it's like, the CEO Sales Strategies podcast, or and they'll tell their friends. And what I have found is it makes great sense for a prospecting tool. And here's the point I want to get across to people. You never know who's listening.
Exactly.
I've been shocked at the people who've been listening to my podcast. And, Susan, you alluded to one of these one time when I talked to you, and I'm like, yeah, okay, right. Because I was like, but the reality is I literally have billion-dollar companies that listen to this podcast. And I'm like, what? Like, and they tell me they learn things. So, and then I've had people just reach out and say, your podcast has changed my world. I listen to every single episode. And they're like, I'd like to hire you. And I'm like, who are you? Right. It's like, I don't know who you are. Right. And so the thing is, from a prospecting tool, it is a very, very, very different positioning tool, because now you're positioned as the expert. It's an incoming lead versus trying to go outbound and try to persuade someone that we actually have the expertise. So in your case, with podcast production and helping, reach the strategy and the training on and around it, it's very clear you're an expert in that field. The first moment that I was on your podcast, I was like, wow, this lady is really, really, really smart when it comes to this situation that we're talking about. And so, all right, let's say somebody's, we're speaking with Susan Finch, right? And Susan has a company called the Funnel Media Group. It's at funnelmediagroupllc.com. We are talking about why you, and I'm not saying should, must have a podcast, and she's given some great rules around, getting clear on the point of the podcast. Let's say now people are saying, okay, Susan, you got me. Doug, you got me. I'm kind of buying into this concept. What should they do next? Like, I mean, because if you talk to some people are like, oh, just go buy a microphone and go on Amazon and order a
right. Go to GarageBand.
Exactly. Right. Get GarageBand for your Apple computer or whatever it is. And you'll be all set for life here. And the reality is, you and I both know that's one of the reasons that people do maybe 6 episodes and die out. So, after they're getting, the point of the podcast is out and they have the idea of who's going to host it, and, they start to identify a team of people to help out. What's the next step?
The next step is to start to line up your topics. And with companies that have a sales team and have a marketing team, those two need to talk. And what's coming up? Are there events? Are there launches? Are there initiatives? Is there a book? Is there a conference? What is it that's coming up? Is there some big announcement you're going to make? Are you going public? Whatever it is, but have topics that fit in with that calendar so that you aren't you're fighting your own company for attention with all your marketing efforts. So have that conversation to figure out, well, what do we want to talk about? And again, everything has to check back to the purpose of the podcast. And you brought up a wonderful point. Yes, it's about making the guests shine, but you have a ton to offer. So you hit them with a 1-2 punch. You hit them being a great host, but you are bringing so much value. If you monologued, you're bringing great value. You are constantly bringing people some very key, well-organized points they can talk about. So this is where we go back into, well, what do you guys already have? You got some great articles, some white papers, something that's not doing so well anymore, but it's still good. But how come nobody likes it? Have a conversation about that. Find what you already own. Make use of that, because that's a great warm-up to get started. That's a good way to break the ice and to start with that rhythm of that consistent content. And then it gives you something to talk about. I have one host and he says, we don't send out a single email without one call to action there to something we've written. We don't waste an email to anybody without giving them something of value in return. As being grateful for your opening my email. Well, you'll end up putting a link to one of your episodes in there then. But something, always give value.
Right.
And be gracious for anybody that bothers to listen, to follow, to read anything you do, pick up the phone and listen to you, whatever it is. Start to come up with your value and get ready, and then make a realistic timeline. Well, we want to get our list ready. We want to get people pumped up about this, because it's like when people launch a book. I liken podcasts more to when an author launches a book that we know will not be a bestseller. It might be like in very niche markets. Right. A lot of you guys have done books and they're number one in a niche market, which is fine because those are your clients. But it is so much nicer to be able to send people a book after you met them. A signed book. Oh, it was so nice meeting you. I'm the author. Podcast is the same way. I'd like to have you on to hear why you're an expert in what you do. We haven't had a lot of time together yet. Come on, my podcast. So much better than, hello, can we please set up a time for a demo? I have great things to show you.
That one made me laugh, as everybody could hear. But the reality is, you can pretty much get anyone on your podcast if you just research and make an truthful pitch.
Yes.
Right. And I purposely, I did not use again, it was a double dare, right? So I was just like, whatever, I'll put the podcast out. I didn't call upon my list at that time of people in my LinkedIn or in Facebook or whatever. I didn't do any of that. I just put this thing out there. And then, we're up into the top third of podcast rankings, right? But you got to stay consistent. That's the thing I have found. And I want everybody to write this down, the 2 C's, consistent and commitment. If you're not committed, well, you still should have a podcast. You must, right? But get a hold of Susan and she'll get you committed, because then you're actually having to show up to do what you said you're going to do.
Yes, I will nag you.
So, that accountability component is really key, because it takes a while for a podcast to actually start taking root.
Yes.
And, I remember when I first saw it, I'm like, wow, 2 people are listening. Like, what? Oh, wow, that's terrible. That was going through my head, right? But then I'm like, well, you're just starting out. That's 2 more people than you had.
Right.
And what I realized is I never hit my list for any of this because I wanted to see where it would go. And then later on, you can hit your list and you can tell people, hey, I got this going on, right? And I also, Susan, I want to ask you this question because, I sort of have a fearless component around going after this because I've just worked for so many big fish or
Right.
worked with big fish that I understand that, the CEO of, this, $25 billion company still has fears and still has desires. So I made a play to go out and just go after big fish for a little bit. And we do it now regularly. And I find a lot of big fish say yes. So if somebody's starting out, do you recommend they go to their warm market friends and family or just go out cold?
Wow. I'm very protective of my list and I don't like to have too many asks.
Right.
I say cold because also the point of it is to meet new people. My other people, they'll catch on and they'll see what I'm doing and they'll check it out and they'll catch up and share it out. But I want to get some new people and some new audiences because that's what's going to open my mind to new ideas and tactics. If I keep talking to the same people over and over, lovely, that's nice and comfortable.
Right.
But it doesn't give me the growth I want.
I would
say
agree
be
with you.
bold. Be bold. Do it.
I agree 100%. Now, I will put a little twist on this because I think it makes it easier to, if you have some contacts that you go, hey, that would be really good for my point of the show. It's okay, but limit it to 3 to 6 of them. That's what I would do. I'd limit it to 3 to 6. This is what I did in the beginning because, it takes a little time to get people who don't know you to say yes on the show.
Right.
And we do want to have some things as, what is it, in the can or something like that, whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Whatever
a few in the can.
Right. So that means you have some episodes ahead of time. Right.
Right.
So if you build those out. So what I did is I took, and I think I had like 6, 7 guests or whatever it was, in the beginning. And then I started doing some monologues. So I would do a guest monologue, monologue, right? And that covered me for like 2.5 months.
Right.
By putting out 1 show a week. And that gave me enough time to actually start talking to people I didn't know. And I would just pitch them. And so those of you who have ever listened to the CEO Sales Strategies podcast, go find the episode on 1-800-GOT-JUNK-CEO. Right? I pitched him basically. Right. So go find Ray, Mr. Ray, last name is Zinn. Right? Because Ray had the longest running CEO tenure of Silicon Valley, and they sold their company for billions of dollars. If you come in, this is what I've learned. If you come in and you are genuine and you say, I'm looking for your help. I'm searching out because you have this wonderful life expertise. And I think it would really be great on the podcast, and the podcast is going to have, it may not have all of these listeners today, but it will, and you'll get exposure. But I'm also going to keep promoting this over and over and again. And I'm going to try to get this out for you. You will be surprised, folks, how many people will actually say yes. And so, and then you can also utilize somebody like Susan, who will actually go out and get you on other people's podcasts, correct? Or get you people to come into your podcast. I mean,
I'll help you get people. The tact is to get good people on your own show. Yes.
Right. Here's another little trick I've learned, Susan, too, is you can also go out. I've done this I used to go out and get on other people's podcasts, right? Yes. So I would go out and get on other people's podcasts, but I would get on the podcast that I was looking to actually have a guest.
Yes.
So you can go out, get on their podcast, you develop a relationship with them, and then you ask them, hey, would you do my podcast? Because if you interview well and you provide value for their listeners, all of a sudden now you're friends, right? And you're kind of sisters or brothers in the podcast world. Exactly. And that's another way to find guests. So, but the reality is you got to just go out and do it, folks. I mean, this is the bottom line. Like Susan, I was just talking to a CEO of a very successful company, and he was on my podcast. And I I asked him, what should CEOs be doing? He said, when you start out as a CEO, you should be out there hitting the street selling.
Yes, always. CEOs must sell.
But a lot of CEOs don't think they should continue to sell. And if we're looking at a podcast, you and I are looking at it, you're the CEO of your podcast. So get out and sell yourself and sell your podcast. And you'll just be surprised how many avenues this will lead you into. And when people get guests on their show, do you recommend them also asking, hey, do you know anybody else that's kind of similar to you? Or, do you have other people that might want to be on my show? Maybe.
I do. And I usually have our folks ask, and I ask, is there anybody that this show would remind you of that you think would enjoy it, that you've been on their show, or somebody that you wish you could have had a conversation with? And those are usually the more pie in the sky. Who do you wish you could have a conversation with in your space? It's like, ooh, I want that person. Because that means everybody would want to listen to that person.
Right. And you would be absolutely amazed at how many people actually know some pretty impressive people.
Yes.
And
6 degrees of separation. It's more like 2.
Yeah. And I've talked to people that are, Ray was kind enough to, like, when he did the podcast, he said to me, and this is what happens when you are a good interviewer. He said to me, he goes, I've been on a lot of podcasts and I haven't been on a podcast like this. This was really enjoyable to me. And then he said the magic words to me, could I introduce you to other people?
Oh, love it.
And I was like, sure. Who do you have in mind? He goes, well, my book is in 4 universities. So I was thinking of, San Jose State University, of getting those people on there. And then he started naming a few others. And I'm like, thank you,
Yeah.
Right. And so my point being is, you're an expert in helping people on the production side, and you're an expert in helping people get people onto their podcast. I would highly recommend, and I don't do this very often on this podcast, but I'm pitching you right now. If people haven't figured it out, give her a call, or Susan, how do they get a hold of you? Like, people are going, yeah, I get it. How do they get a hold of you?
Pretty easy. Susan at funnelradio.com. Really short.
Susan t-shirt. So Susan at funnelradio.com.
Will get to me, or go to the website, funnelmediagroupllc.com. There are all different ways to discern, oh, they do that. Oh, and they market. We're starting to position ourselves as podcast CMOs because we can fill in all the gaps. Do the fun part. Let us do the rest.
And if you let people do the rest, you'll make far less mistakes.
Yes.
And I never did my own production. I refused to do it because I was an audio engineer when I was going to school. So I knew a lot of the back end of this. And there's a lot more that goes into it than people realize to do this the right way. And quite frankly, go out and sell something, pay for a year's worth of production, and take that off your plate, because that frees you up. And now as you go and you get more people who are calling you from your podcast,
right?
Then what happens is you now have a profit stream coming in from a fairly automated process when you're not doing all the back end.
Exactly.
So
do what you do best. I'll do what I do best. Well
said, Susan. So look, I could talk to you forever, but I know we can't, because that would make the podcast too long, and then people will yell at me for making it too long. But that's okay. And then some people will say, hey, I loved it. It was so much packed information. I'd love to have you back for round 2 if you're willing to come back.
I would love to. I enjoy my time with you.
Oh, thank you. So Susan, I'm going to thank you so much for being on the CEO Sales Strategies podcast, bringing a lot of great information, great and valuable content to people. And folks, reach out to her, and we'll go from there. So thanks again, Susan.
Thank you, Doug. I'll talk to you very soon, I hope.
Will do. Okay. So you heard me say this. I'll say it again. Podcasting today is a must. Now, you can argue that point, but the reality is your competition is going to figure this out. So if you haven't already started, I would get going now. And certainly reach out to Susan if you have any questions. You can certainly reach out to us if you have any questions. Be happy to help you on that subject matter as well, and help steer some of the conversation in the right direction. Number one, though, make sure when you're going to do a podcast that you do know the point of the podcast. And if you don't, launch it anyways, get some feedback from people, and then you could always adjust the podcast. Now, remember, in the beginning, unless you have a huge following already, there's not going to be a lot of people probably listening to your podcast. So if you make some mistakes in the beginning, so what, right? It's okay. Just keep moving on. B, understand who's going to do what in that podcast. So you want to kind of map it out. Otherwise, the podcast can become more like something more to do. It is a process that will, I would say, will take your time from you if you don't know what you're doing. And that's in one way, I think a lot of reasons people just kind of stop doing the podcast. 3 is identify the team. That's where Susan and her company would come in. And I think 4, which I would probably put as number 2, actually, is you want to have fun, right? Have fun with your podcast. Take dares, take dreams, of people and stretch those dreams, because you'd be surprised positively how people will respond when you're helping them grow on the episode that you're doing with them. Sometimes I'll just ask questions out of just nobody knows what they're going to be because we don't script these particular podcasts. We might have a couple of points we're going to talk about, but we want them to be conversational as possible because they're real that way. And you will make mistakes. And by the way, don't worry about the mistakes. Sometimes when you leave the mistakes in that particular podcast, it's actually a better performing podcast because people know you're real. If we make a mistake, I'll go, well, folks, you just know we're live, because just like in the old days on live television or live radio, you couldn't snip it out, right? It was something that just happened. If you drop the coffee cup and it goes crash, you're going to hear that in the old days. You'll hear the same thing here if you don't edit that out and you go, well, just drop the coffee cup. People will know that is real. So don't worry about being real. Don't worry about being perfect. That's the other thing I've learned in being with a podcast. You leave in all of these things because people, let's face it, we're all people. We might have different titles in life, but the reality is we're all people. We have all dreams. We have all desires. We have fears. And when you go from culture to culture to culture, you're going to find, for the most part, they are universal across the world. And so here's the deal. Go out and just talk to Susan if you don't know how to do this. Or like I said, reach out to us. We'll be happy to give you some input on it as well. But give podcasting an idea of a try and then commit to it. Because if you do this long term, I promise you, I have people today that go, I've been listening to your podcast. And I'm like, wow, I didn't know. And I actually had people that when I was staying consistent and then I took a couple of weeks off, people were like, where's your podcast? Right. So they will ask and demand reliability in the process to the commitment. So do it, if you will. All right. If you like the subject matter, as always, and you think you would like another subject matter, and you're looking to hear something of some expert to come in, let us know. Maybe it's you who is the expert and you want to be on this particular podcast. That's great too. If so, reach out to YouMatter, YOUMATTER at ceosalesstrategies.com. If you like this podcast and you want to help us out, please go give it a 5-star review. If you feel it warrants a 5-star review, tell other people about this. The more people that know this information, the more people that can get helped. It also helps us. And again, if you want to yourself, someone you know, your team members, your whole sales team, if you will, your company, if you want to get your people or yourself to the top 1% of earners, which means that you're selling at the top 1% globally in your industry, this is what we do. We have a process on and around this. So just reach out to me at Doug@ceosalesstrategies.com or hit me up on LinkedIn at Doug Brown 1234 or go to the phone number 603-595-0303. Again, this is Doug C. Brown signing off today. Go sell something. Sell a ton of it if you can, but sell it profitably. And do it in a win-win, trustworthy fashion. Help other people out. They will help you. Everybody's happier that way, and life is better. Until next time on the CEO Sales Strategies podcast, to your success. Okay, guys, that works great. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the CEO Sales Strategies podcast. What is something that you learned that you could act on today? Don't forget to schedule it now, or it may never get forward momentum. If you find our content valuable, please leave a favorable review and let us know what you liked. Please also share this with others if the content will help them. For our show notes, other episodes, and more interesting content and resources, please visit ceosalesstrategiespodcast.com. See you soon, and to your continued success.